Many claim they like riding, but I know that they ain't. Ride or die. I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Ride or die. Many claim they like riding, but I know that they ain't. They see the red and they call me a devil, but mind the treble, let me level with you. I used to idolize rappers that paint they face, but now I rock the blood of Christ ever since I've been saved by grace. They see the red and they call me a devil, but mind the treble, let me idolize rappers that paint they face, but now I rock the blood of Christ, now I rock the blood of saved by grace. I've been saved by grace. They see the red and they call me a devil, mind the treble, let me idolize rappers, but now I rock the blood of Christ.
Do you by chance have the stream going in the background?
Sorry, what?
Do you happen to have the stream on in the background by chance?
I'm not aware of it. Sorry, what?
Do you happen to have the stream on in the background? Because I'm hearing an echo. Normally that's what happens if YouTube
I'm not aware of it. I'm not aware of it. Stream?
Because I'm hearing an echo.
Yeah, I'm hearing it also. So how do I switch it off? Stream?
You just go to your YouTube and then click close.
I'm hearing it also. Yeah, I'm hearing it also. So how do I switch it off? You
just go to your YouTube and then
I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it. How do I switch it off?
Just go to your YouTube. Are you using a phone or are you using
I'm using a laptop.
computer?
Laptop. Computer.
Okay. I'm not hearing the echo anymore. Well, now I am again.
I'm using a laptop. Yeah.
I'm not hearing the echo anymore.
Okay, yeah, I switched off. I think I was on YouTube at the same time, your channel.
All right, testing.
Okay, yeah, I switched off. I think I was on YouTube at the same time, your channel.
Strange, I'm still getting the echo. Let me... Strange, I'm still getting the echo.
I have no idea where it's coming from, though.
Testing, so it's not on my end. Testing. Testing. So strange, I'm still picking up the echo.
Yeah, I'm hearing something in the background too.
So strange, I'm still picking up the echo.
Yeah, I'm hearing something in the background too. And my voice is delayed by a few seconds.
Let's try this. If you want to
and my voice is delayed by
hop out, pop out of StreamYard and close the apps, and then
yeah, sure.
we can jump right back in.
This.
If you want to hop out, pop
yeah.
out of StreamYard and close the apps, and then
sure. Yeah, sure.
We can jump right back in.
Okay, I'm doing it now. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, sure.
All right, guys. Once again, thank you for watching. Today's video is sponsored by Courtroom of Atheism. The link to that is in the description, and I will be talking with an author that I met online. I've been reading one of his books. Great individual, fantastic to have conversations with. He will be back on shortly. I do apologize for the delay. Square Circles, appreciate you joining. Appreciate you joining.
I'm back.
I just heard the echo again, too.
That's a bummer. Back?
I just heard the echo again too.
No idea what's causing it.
What app did you use to open up StreamYard in?
No idea what's causing it. I have used Chrome. The Safari doesn't support it.
I use Safari and that works for me.
I have used Chrome. The Safari doesn't support it. I don't know why it's.
I use Safari and that works for me.
Oh wait, I think maybe. Okay, I have shut down one YouTube channel. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I think the echo's gone.
I'm also not hearing the echo, so it was definitely the YouTube popping up in the background.
Yeah.
You would not believe how many times that happens, and YouTube just pops up and we don't even realize it.
Big Brother's watching you.
All right. Welcome.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for the 6-minute delay. Sometimes these technical things happen. So how are you?
Excellent. Thank you. I had a great discussion with you, I remember, on Clubhouse. Although sometimes Clubhouse begins to resemble a madhouse, if you ask me. But no, we had a good discussion about this topic. So yeah, I'm great. How about you?
I'm good. I'm fantastic. And you were describing to me something that really interested me, which was how you use hadith and how you use that in the Quran. And the book that you recommended, which was one of your, I think you have 5 books out there.
About 50 titles on on Amazon. More on the way, hopefully.
And the one part that interested me, which makes a lot of sense, is that where you indicate that the Quran is not saying that all the old scriptures were corrupted, but maybe just some. Maybe we could start off with that, and then we'll mention the book.
Okay, let me put it this way. Perhaps I could just give a little background on how this paper happened. I was teaching at an Islamic university here in Malaysia, the Islamic Science University of Malaysia, for 5 years. And of course, I would discuss from time to time with my students, most of whom were Muslims, Malays in particular, about the Quran and the previous revelations. And I kept getting from them this message that the Quran abrogated the previous revelations. I'm underlying the word revelations as distinguished from scriptures. The scriptures are the written records of the revelations. The original revelations were completely uncorrupted, I believe, but perhaps some distortions may have found their way into the written records of the scriptures. A friend of mine, actually, he was from the US, Canaan, Connecticut. He studied religion here at the University of Toronto, and he told me that he was working on the manuscripts of the New Testament. And he said they had more than 600 versions of the New Testament, all different from each other. And there on microfiche, and his job was to collate them and to try to come up with one authoritative version of the New Testament. So now my students were telling me that the Quran abrogated the previous revelations or scriptures. They didn't always differentiate between the two, but I was reading the exact opposite in the Quran. I was reading it practical on a daily basis, and the Quran says in no fewer than 20 verses that it confirms the previous revelations. In 10 cases, 10 verses, the word Torah and Injil are used, the Torah and the Gospel used together in the same verse. And in 10 other verses, the Arabic expression Musaddiqu lima baina yadai is used, which means the Quran confirms what is between your hands, which literally means, which means what is with you already, meaning the Torah and the Injil. So I thought I should write a paper on this because it is one of the major misconceptions among mainstream Muslims that the Quran abrogated the previous revelations. No, it did not abrogate the previous revelations. It confirms them. Of course, with some corrections. As you may know, the notion of Trinity is rejected in the Quran. Quran says, La taqulu thalatha, don't say three, in English. It also says that this vicarious atonement, the doctrine of vicarious atonement, is was not part of the revelation. We are all responsible for our deeds, and no one can kind of take it upon himself to, as you know, the doctrine to die for our sins. So in other words, nobody can bear another person's burdens. This is of course also rejected, stated in the Quran. And of course the idea that God had children is also rejected according to the Quran. How can he who has no wife have children? So that is also rejected. But apart from these main points like the divinity of Jesus, the Trinity, and also that some people perhaps think that Jesus was God, these are all rejected. But we have to remember that the Quran also advises the Jews and the Christians to refer to their own scriptures, despite these these issues in those scriptures. The Quran and Allah, God still advises the Jews and Christians to refer to their scriptures. So how would God, advise the Jews and the Christians to refer to their own scriptures if these, if these revelations and even scriptures were abrogated? In fact, I was just reading Edip Yücsel's book. I'm helping him edit his Quran translations, and I have already gone through the translation. Now I'm going through the footnotes. And in his footnotes on Surah Al-Baqarah, I think he I don't agree with the way he handles the Old and New Testament. He seems to imply that all of them have been corrupted, which I don't agree with at all. It's like a person who has a basket of eggs and 10 of them are rotten and 90 of them are good. He's going to throw out the entire basket, both the good and the bad. I don't think we should be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. There may be some statements in the existing scriptures that we may not agree with as Muslims. And there are even some Christians who don't agree with them. Like I understand that the Unitarians did not accept the doctrine of the Trinity, the people who founded Harvard University, by the way. So we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater. We should take the beliefs on a case-by-case basis and only consider those to be unreliable, which from a Muslim point of view, which clearly conflict with the teaching of the Quran. But on the whole, the Quran confirms the previous revelations, and this opinion has been voiced by other people. For instance, Tamara Son, in her book, introductory book on Islam, mentions this. Even here, a local scholar, Naqib Alatas, says in his book, Islam and Secularism, that the Quran confirms the previous revelations. So this idea that the Quran has abrogated the previous revelations is one of the biggest errors, I think, in traditional exegesis and in the traditional Islamic understanding of the relationship between the Quran and the previous scriptures. I mean, why would God abrogate his own words? So that in a nutshell is my position. Thank you.
Because just going through your book, I highlighted some things too. You put the assertion of abrogation is made on the basis of verse 2:106.
Correct.
In this verse, and please correct me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, it's ayah?
Yeah, ayah 106.
Yep, is incorrectly rendered as revelation rather than sign. What would indicate that this should be sign versus revelation, or revelation versus sign? How would I look at that and then judge that particular verse?
Perhaps I didn't get it quite right. To me, the main point about that verse is not that it was... to me, the word ayah means both sign and a verse in the Quran. However, the main point I was trying to make in that paragraph, perhaps I need to go over that and fix it. The main point I was trying to say that there's a secondary meaning of the word nasakh, which is to transcribe something from one place to another. In this sense, the Quran would be a kind of transcript of the Torah and the Injil, and a kind of I don't know how you want to look at it, updated, fundamentally conveying the same message of monotheism, but kind of like, how we have in applications, iOS 12.5, then we get 12.8. I don't know if this is the right analogy, but something like an updated version of an earlier operating system. That's how I would look at it. Now, whether it's a sign or a verse, that I may have, it's possible I didn't get it quite right there, but I can say here for the record that the word ayah, there are different opinions on this, and even Edip Yücsel has some stuff on it, which sounds a bit, I don't know, that could be discussed on another occasion. But to me, the word ayah means both a sign and a revelation. But some people, like Muhammad Asad, seems to imply that the doctrine of abrogation could apply to the previous revelation. But I would hasten to add, we have to be careful with publications, even when they have the word Muhammad Asad in them, because I have caught at least one publisher here in this country tampering with the words that Muhammad Asad used in translating a certain word. So this could be attributed to him falsely. But I think, so what I'm trying to say is that I consider the word ayah to mean both sign and verse. I don't know if that helps. Thank you.
No, thank you. And it's possible that as I was highlighting these notes, that there's more context within that. So I would advise people to also check this out too, because you can give me a lot of information in 30 minutes, but there's a lot more detail and nuance within the book. I found, which the book we're talking about is, Are the Old and New Testament Abrogated by the Final Testament? And when I'm going through that, there's one that says, recitation of previous revelations is one chunk, and this part says, God calls on all people to believe in the Quran as well as the previous scriptures in their original form. The Quran says explicitly in no fewer than 20 times that the Quran confirms the earlier revelations. And this was kind of, if I understand you correctly, where you were getting at, that the Quran is telling the Jews and Christians to look at their testament. So there must have been something of value there, or something that they could gain from it.
Of course, of course. Just, I mean, just consider the Proverbs or the Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament. I don't find anything un-Islamic about that at all. I mean, I find 95% or more of the New Testament very Islamic. I don't have an issue with that. But the Muslims, traditional Muslims, have been taught this false doctrine, going back to Ibn Kathir and other problematic exegetes, that the Quran abrogated, the previous revelations. Actually, they go further than that. They even claim that the Quran abrogated 120 of its own verses, all the so-called peace verses. I have another book on that. It's called The Six Waves That Transformed the Religion of Peace into Islamism or Political Islam. This was a catastrophic tampering with the teaching of the Quran. Very, very, very significant, because it actually gave us a kind of militant rendition of the teaching of the Quran, which is not justified at all by the Quran itself. So we are seeing here massive tampering with the message of the Quran by none other than the Muslim exegetes themselves. So now additional evidence against the doctrine of abrogation can be found in 3 verses in the Quran where God says, according to as we understand it as Muslims, that you will not find a change in the words of Allah. In other words, this precludes any kind of notion of abrogation. Also, almost all the modern, commentators, I don't know if I should mention the names, Fazlur Rahman, Taha Jabir Alwani, Ismail Faruqi, Muhammad Asad, Muhammad Abdu, Rashid Rida, Muhammad Ghazali, all of them rejected the doctrine of abrogation, some of them using very strong words. So the whole doctrine of abrogation, whether of the previous revelations or of the Quran by a Quranic verse, or even of the Quran by traditions, and this is really, really something very serious, because according to Taha Jabir Awani in his book, Reviving the Balance, it was the doctrine of abrogation of a Quranic verse by a tradition was actually upheld by, this was not a minority opinion, this was a majority opinion in the early days of Islam. So essentially what has happened, I see it as a relapse or a lapse into polytheism, because essentially what they have done, they have allowed the words of a human being to abrogate the word of God. I just don't see how this can possibly happen. So there's had been massive, tremendous distortions of our understanding of the Quran. And this is not coming from non-Muslim sources. This is coming from inside the Muslim sources. So if you would like to get more information, I would recommend the viewers to look into this book I mentioned just now, Jabir Alwani, Reviving the Balance, 2017, published by IIIT, which is located in the United States, Herndon, Virginia. They published this book along with many others like it. So there's a lot of work for us to do here. We need to address the traditional misrepresentations of the teaching of the Quran. That's a big job, and that's ahead of us. And I think the Quran is, by the way, are in the forefront of this struggle to free the Quran from this baggage that was laid all over it by various traditions and also traditional ulama. Sorry to say, we need to stop putting these traditional ulama on a pedestal and begin asking some serious questions as to whether they got it right or not. I mean, there are many people now say that doctrine of abrogation is among the most problematic doctrines. I mean, Ibrahim is referred to in the Quran as a Muslim. The helpers of Jesus, the Hawariyun, are referred to in the Quran as Muslims. And many other people, referred to in the Old Testament are also referred to as Muslims. So if there were Muslims before the coming of the Prophet Muhammad, surely there was also Islam. So to me, the religion given to Abraham and Moses and Jesus and Muhammad actually was all one religion, quite frankly. That's how I would put it. But interestingly, when I wrote this in my paper, my boss, who is a well-known Sharia scholar, Muhammad Hashim Kamali, for whom I worked for 10 years actually here in Malaysia. I was practically his right-hand man. I edited practically all the stuff he has written while I was there. Several books and a bunch of articles, although I was not always the only editor, but I'm pretty sure I was the main editor in most cases. When I wrote that in my paper on, I think this very paper that turned into a book, he wrote in a margin that, he wrote the two words in the margin, gone mad, meaning that I've gone mad thinking that the Quran, that the religion that was given to Abraham, Moses, and Jesus and Abraham was all one religion. As I like to put it to my friends, I was wondering whether he would dare to do the same thing and write the same thing in the margin of the Quran, because that's where God says the same thing. Brother James, I just need to plug in this computer very quickly. Can you give me 30 seconds to plug in?
Absolutely.
I'll be right back. I'll be right back. Think of it as a commercial break. Sorry, thanks.
No, that's fine. Today's video is sponsored by a friend of mine, Johnny Haas, who wrote a book called The Courtroom of Atheism. It's a subject that's near and dear to my heart, talking to people of different faiths and lack of beliefs. I do want to say hello to the chat because we do have a few people here. Square Circles, thank you for joining me. Tamina, if I butchered your name, I apologize. I've seen you here a few times. I appreciate you joining. I appreciate you following and watching these videos. I've actually got to talk to you a few times, I think. Let me see. To kind of go back to something we had talked about on Clubhouse, which I thought was profound, because I always had a problem with the statement I'm going to make, but then I liked the statement you made, and maybe you could kind of go from there. But oftentimes I'm told that you need the hadith to interpret the Quran, and then you need the Quran to interpret the hadith. But that seems circular. Like, it seems like you're interpreting each other with each other. But when you said that the Quran, the final revelation, is what you would use to filter to the hadith, that made a lot more sense.
Of course, and it does make a sense. You see, we consider the Quran to be the word of God. The hadiths are basically hearsay, words of human beings. So how can you possibly maintain? And the hadiths are self-contradictory, many. So how on what basis am I going to explain that which is higher by referring to that which is lower? This is just unbelievable. Another major, problem in the process of exegesis. And actually, perhaps an expression also of a lapse into polytheism, because what you ask, when whoever takes that line is actually saying that a human being can explain better than God. Now, how do they? And there was even one Sahaba who declared publicly, quote, "Nobody explains better than Allah or God." End of quote. So the idea that hadith can explain the words of God better than God himself is a kind of blasphemous, actually. It's less than respectful, I would say, to the Quran, even to God. It implies and suggests that somehow on that day when God revealed this particular verse, he was somehow a little bit blurred, and now he requires assistance from his own servants to help him make himself clear. And I find this thought quite astonishing. I would never dare to make such a claim myself, but somehow in Islamic exegesis, this became part of the standard narrative. It's just unbelievable. I know I'm not alone. There are other people who are questioning. It's like Mahmoud Shahrur and others. There is a group in Egypt who are claiming that what we have witnessed in Islam is a kind of reversal of the authority of the Sunnah and the Quran. The Quran used to be on top. Now it is actually not even in a second place, because eventually, as Taha Jabir al-Wani argues in his book, which I mentioned before, Reviving the Balance, it was the opinion of the scholars, the ulama became the most authoritative, the primary source, the primary reference, and both the Quran and the Sunnah were marginalized, so that the Sunnah became number 2 and the Word of God actually became number 3. As another sheikh puts it, his name is Sheikh Hassan Farhan al-Maliki. He's got some excellent videos on YouTube, and some of them are in English. I would recommend the one called The False Hadith Culture, and a few others for the English viewers. He says that what we have done in Islam is basically we have turned the pyramid of authority upside down. So that which was on top now is down in number 3, and that which was number 3 became number 1. So we have to reverse this trend and reassign to the Quran, to Revelation, the preeminence that it rightfully claims on us. And I would add also that this doctrine of war, jihad, there is no justification in the Quran for aggressive warfare, none. The Quran only permits fighting in self-defense. That's all there is to it. There is no such thing as preemptive warfare, like the war of the Darul Islam against the Darul Harb, meaning the war of the abode of peace against the abode of war, which sounds like an early version of the Clash of Civilization thesis. There's no such thing in the Quran. So this was another invention by some of the ulama who came later, who wanted to provide a militant reinterpretation of the Quran to justify territorial expansion by the empire at that time in the making, such as the Ottoman Empire and so on and so forth. You may recall the Ottomans made 2 attacks against Vienna, transgressing the verse according to which Allah does not love aggressors, and they lost in both cases. And we can see this also in other history. Napoleon and Hitler both invaded Russia. They fought aggressive war against these countries, and what happened to them? They both lost, and they lost real bad. So what I'm saying is that there's no justification whatsoever for this aggressive warfare that you hear from some of the Muslim and even contemporary Muslim ulama. I'm very surprised that some people are still holding on to this really distorted perception.
And then, well, we're still kind of hitting the hadith a little bit. There is often when we have these conversations, to steelman some of my Sunni Muslim friends, they would, the first question that I think they ask is, how do you know how to pray and how many times to pray without having hadith?
Well, first of all, whenever the Quran is silent on a certain matter, I would say that this indicates a certain degree of discretion on our part. The important part in Islam, as I think in other religions, is that we pray. The how is a secondary consideration. There are many different ways to pray. There is not only just one right way to pray. Even the Prophet Muhammad prayed in different ways. Sometimes his hands were down, sometimes his hands were crossed on his chest. So they are making too much of this issue. And by the way, the Quran presents itself as a complete book which explains everything in detail. So we should accept this, and we should not try to attribute to the Quran imperfection or flaw. The Muslims are expected to believe that the Quran is perfect without any flaw. Anyone who says that the Quran is imperfect or incomplete is actually attributing, to the Quran this flaw or imperfection, and indirectly also attributing it to Allah Himself. So these people who are making such statements should actually backtrack and accept what the Quran says about itself, that it is perfect, complete, and explains everything that we need to know about our faith in detail. Of course, it doesn't explain everything in detail. There are certain things like the Pythagorean theorem we can discover on our own. We don't need Allah to explain it to us. So that's not included in the Quran. But in terms of our relationship to our Creator, all the knowledge that we need is there. So that's what I would say in response to this. So the people who are actually saying that the Quran is incomplete, that it needs to be completed by the hadith, are actually rejecting a part of the teaching of the Quran itself, that part which teaches that the Quran is complete and fully detailed, you see. I don't know. I hope that clarifies it a little bit.
Yeah, that definitely helps. I wanted to make sure I got that question out because I know I'm going to get asked. And if my face keeps glowing, it's because I'm actually pulling up Leslie's book, I got it on Kindle. You can get a hard copy if you prefer that. Let me go to this. It starts reading, none of the revelation that we do abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but was substituted for something better or similar. And then you put that means transcribe or transfer and not obliterate. That might be a good point to kind of hit for a few minutes.
Sure. By the way, I would like to add that there's a fellow in Canada, Omar Ramahi. I got a video on that, and he makes exactly the same point as I do, that the word nasakh here means to transcribe. You can find his video. I think there's a fellow called Pegame Haq, and they have an interview with him on precisely this topic. So yeah, the nasakh here, which is normally translated as abrogate, actually should be rendered as transcribe. These misrepresentations of the Quran, I think, stem in part from ethnocentrism among some of the Muslims. They want somehow to allege or imply to the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, that their revelation is no longer valid, that they have nothing to stand on, as the Quran puts it. Some of the Jews used to say that, I think, to the Christians in the old days, and they used to receive something similar back in the return. So now some of the Muslim brothers and sisters seem to want to prove to the people of the book that they have nothing to stand on. No, that's not the case at all. They have a lot to stand on, and in fact, they are advised by God in the Quran itself to stand by what is already with them, despite the fact that according to the Quran there may be some misperceptions, but these are corrected in the Quran, like the issues I mentioned earlier. So yes, no, I think the earlier revelations, and even most of what you find in the previous scriptures, most of what you find in the Torah and the Injil, I think still stands. And as long as it doesn't conflict with the Quran, there's no reason for any Muslim to reject it. In fact, we are advised also to believe in the books that came before. This is written at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah. Those who believe in what was sent down, and those who believe in what was sent down before. So we are advised also to believe in these books. And I think if we take this attitude, which is a more inclusive approach to Islam, we can reduce the tensions between the Muslims and the people of the book also, because we realize that our traditions have actually, our religions or faiths actually have shared roots, you see. So I remember one time I was in Koh Samui, where we sometimes go for holiday, and a Jewish lady from Israel came along and sat down at our table. I was there with my wife and daughter. They asked us, can we join us, because there was not much space elsewhere. She had a friend from France, a young fellow, and they were members of the Los Bandidos motorcycle club. And when I mentioned to her that we are Muslim people also, she just kind of waved her hand and said, it's the same religion, meaning that our religion, Islam, is the same religion as her religion. So I was quite shocked, surprised, pleasantly, I might add, because I realized that this lady, I called her a motorcycle mama from Israel, a member of the Los Bandidos motorcycle club, knows the Islam better than many of our learned ulama, and she sees that this is actually the same religion that was sent to the Jews, to them, and also sent to us, and of course I think the Christians as well, because why would Allah God send different revelations to different people? That would definitely confuse them. What do you think, Brother James? Sorry, I know you're supposed to interview me, but
I appreciate the information. I love kind of soaking this in and thinking about it. I mean, what you're saying makes sense. And it's something that I've always felt intuitively, is that I don't see God as somebody who can make mistakes, and I wouldn't see God as somebody who reveals a revelation, lets a group of people corrupt it completely, then he sends his Messiah, and then allows that revelation to get completely corrupted. And then he sends a final revelation that abrogates all the text before it, while at the same time telling Jews and Christians to refer to these texts. Now, we can argue that maybe there might be some things that might not be online, or maybe the interpretation is not there, but that it always, that view that this was maintained in at least a majority particular way seems more in line with God than mistake, and then fix.
Of course, absolutely. I remember the discussions I had with my friends from the US. I expressed to him the point of view, something that how tragic it is that there's such a gap. That was before I became a Muslim, such a gap between the Jews and the Christians, because the Jews cannot accept the divinity of Jesus, and the Christians are not willing to give up on this concept. So they are fated to be separated by this. Little did I realize that actually the correct view is that that actually there is no conflict between the religions if they are properly accurately understood. All conflict disappears. There may be some small differences in terms of minor issues, but on all the major points, I think the three faiths will agree if they are correctly understood. So I realized that my initial perception of this inevitable conflict between the religions was wrong. There is no conflict between the religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There's only a conflict or a tension between the interpretations, or rather misinterpretations, of these religions. That's where the conflict is, not between the original revelations as they came to us in the original form. So our job is basically to discover what was that original teaching. And in the Western tradition, by the way, there was a German philosopher called Friedrich Hegel who attempted to do just that in his essay called The Positivity of Christian Religion. You can find it online. It's also available free in PDF format. And that's what he attempted to do. He attempted to separate the pure, pristine, original teaching of Jesus from what he called the positive elements of Christianity of his day, from elements that were added on. Now, of course, how successful he was or not, that's another question. But there were such attempts to do this in history.
Yeah, and we were talking about abrogation, and you were indicating to me that we're talking about 120 verses in particular that were said to be abrogated, but they're not.
Correct. In fact, some ulama say they're even higher, more than that. Some claim, I think, even as many as 200 or even 300. I would recommend an article by Muhammad Ghazali. Just type in his name, Muhammad Ghazali, and into Google with abrogation. You will find this article. He rejects the doctrine of abrogation. All these 120 verses were actually what we call peace verses. All the verses that say good things about Jews and Christians, according to this teaching, were abrogated. Now, he uses very strong language to refer to this notion of abrogation of the peace verses. He calls it, I have to excuse my language, but I'm repeating what he said, and he called it, a quote, a crassest stupidity, end of quote, that they claim that the Quran abrogated 120 peace verses. And he has some additional things to say. I would highly recommend. He was the Sheikh of Al-Azhar. He was actually the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood before Yusuf al-Qaradawi took over. And he wrote an interesting book, interpretation of the Quran, called The Themes of the Quran. That's also a very readable book. So, and he's not alone in rejecting this doctrine of abrogation. But the significance of this rejection of the peace verses, that, as I argue in my other book, The Six Waves, the abrogation of the peace verses actually transformed the message of the Quran into something militant, something that is not there in the Quran. It transformed the religion of peace into a religion of into political Islam, into a religion or a misunderstanding of religion, which actually advocates, as some of the ulama advocated, aggressive war against non-Muslims, even when the non-Muslims were not attacking the Muslims. Now, this is unbelievable travesty, but you can find it. They called it the sixth pillar of Islam. So they actually corrupted very deeply the teaching of jihad, because the military part of the jihad, which is permitted in the Quran, is only and exclusively jihad in self-defense. There's no grounds whatsoever to say that Muslims are allowed or even required to attack non-Muslims, even when the non-Muslims are not attacking the Muslims. This is an unbelievable corruption of the teaching of the Quran, and we need to address it. I have made a humble effort in my book on the six waves, but more needs to be done, because even some contemporary scholars like ulama, like Sayyid Ramadan al-Buti, still held on to this teaching that verse 9:5, famous verse, abrogated all the 120 peace verses, and therefore that we still have this duty, this requirement to wage war against non-Muslims, even when they are not at war with us. Now,
And where
I'm at a
was
loss
that
for
verse
words.
at again, too, just for the
That
audience?
verse is in Surah number 9, verse 5. You know, the famous verse that says, kill them wherever you find them. But that verse is almost always taken out of context. Verse was revealed in a context of an ongoing war. And there was a period of truce which was broken by the enemies of the Muslims at the time. So God says, once the truce is, over, then do this. Would you be surprised if Joseph Stalin told his Russian soldiers, kill those Nazis wherever you find them? Would you be surprised? Of course not. Well, what is the difference here? You're under attack. Your very existence is at stake. You have to defend yourself. And that is what was happening at the time. And that's where this verse comes from. You need to see it in context. I recommend Muhammad Assad's commentary on this verse. He's got among the best commentaries on these verses, not just on these verses, but on other verses as well.
Yeah, that makes sense, because when I read the Quran in totality last December, you can read the Quran, anybody listening, in probably about 20 hours straight through. I recommend you slow down a bit, just because sometimes there's words that you might not be familiar with. Like if you hear Satan or Satan, you might want to say, is this the Satan that's depicted in the Bible? Which I found out was not quite a different, created by fire, right?
Yeah, yeah. I myself have not focused on these minute, details. I focused on the main thing because what struck me when I first read the Quran is how it kind of retold the stories that you find in the Old Testament. Almost everything is there. The story of Adam and Eve, of course, is told with some differences. The story of the flood, the story of Lot, the story of Musa, the story of Yusuf. It's all there. Abel and Cain. So some people will go so far as to say, oh, yeah, it's there because it was plagiarized from the Old Testament. Now, you can take that view if you want, but I think the reason it is so similar is because it is basically telling the same story, in somewhat different words, admittedly, but it is there. So the parallel is there.
And one thing you said in the private chat, which I thought was interesting, and backs your position, is that the reason why, like, the Quran is telling the stories, but it's not going into as much detail on the stories, is because God has already revealed those, and God might not necessarily be obligated to repeat himself. So he's referencing to things that we already know.
Yeah, of course. No, I think it's really, I think, quite arrogant to say that the New Testament, the Old Testament were abrogated. That is really, to me, reveals a very ignorant attitude. And I think most of the educated Muslims that I have read or spoken to, they don't buy this. I remember an ambassador from Sweden, I was sitting next to him one time at the International Institute for Strategic Studies here in Malaysia. When I told him the same idea that the Quran confirms the previous revelations, he told me, oh, I just heard the same thing from the Saudi ambassador to Malaysia when I attended his talk in another place. So even the Saudis are basically saying, conveying this message. And by the way, in the United Arab Emirates, they are building a complex, what they call the complex of Abrahamic faiths. And they have one building dedicated to Judaism, one building dedicated to Christianity, and one building dedicated to Islam. And they are basically trying to emphasize that, look, these religions have common roots. They have shared roots. There's no reason for us to have so much conflict between us. Ismail and Isaac, they were practically partly related, through in Abraham's family. So I think these are all steps in the right direction. But there are other people who take a very exclusive, understanding of Islam, and they say, no, to the people of the book, what you have is all abrogated. You have nothing left to stand on. If you want to get guidance, you have to become Muslims. Otherwise, you're all going to hell. I don't think the Quran justifies that attitude one bit, because the Quran says, "Alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun." That means those who believe and do righteous deeds, no fear shall be on them, neither shall they grieve. Now, that is a reference to Jews and Christians and some others. So this is actually a very inclusive, definition of a believer. And I don't see that these people who are referred to here in this verse are going to hell. I don't see that at all. They are being assured that they will be safe. No fear shall be on them, and neither shall they grieve. That doesn't sound to me like people who are going to hell, brother. I don't know. And this verse is repeated several times in the Quran, those words.
One thing on Clubhouse, I get a lot of grief for. They say, James, you just say that Shia Muslims and Quran only or Quran preferred Muslims make more sense because you want to fight with Sunnis. And my thought is, no, that's not necessarily why I say that. The reason why I say that, to be honest with you, is because of conversations like this where they will tell me outright that the Quran is the authority. It's always the Quran first, and then any hadith would have to be considered strongly through that. So I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Same here.
And for any Sunni Muslims, uh, send me a message. There's also Clubhouse conversations, and you could probably even have a conversation with Leslie. He's on there periodically.
Yeah, we have another meeting on Monday about what does the Quran say about thinking. The Quran encourages thinking, but we have one hadith which says, believe it or not, according to which the Prophet allegedly said that anyone who uses his brain or his reason to interpret the Quran is committing an act of disbelief or kufr. That allegedly the Prophet said that anyone who uses his brain to understand the Quran is actually committing an act of disbelief. And to me, this is absolutely shocking. So how am I ever going to understand the Quran if I'm not allowed to use my reason, brother? So those people who believe these hadiths, actually what they do is they think that to be pious, you have to stop using your brain. You have to leave your brain outside the mosque before you go in. There is even a doctrine called kufr al-fikr, the disbelief of thinking. So this hadith has done a huge amount of damage, I think, to Muslims because it discouraged them to reflect upon the Quran, which we are called upon to do by the Quran itself, to think about it, to reflect on it, to meditate about it. And if you are not going to use your reason to understand the Quran, how on earth will you be able to follow it? How can you follow anything you don't understand? So by adopting these hadiths, those Muslims who believe in it have actually prevented themselves not only from understanding the Quran, but also from following the Quran. And what did they do in consequence of abandoning the Quran, as many people point out, including Taj Abirawani? And even the Quran says, the Prophet will say on the Day of Judgment, my Lord, these people have abandoned the Quran. What did they do after abandoning the Quran? In this way, they turned to another source, a human man-made source called the hadith. They turned to tradition and began to follow tradition instead of revelation. And what happened as a result? As a result, the entire Islamic civilization collapsed and disintegrated because they no longer followed the revealed word of God, but instead they chose to follow the words of human beings, which are fallible. And nowhere they cannot in any sense be considered equal to the words of God as we would see it.
Yeah, and when I read the Quran, there's a verse within the Quran that tells you to test the Quran, I believe.
Yeah.
Do you know which one I'm referring to?
Well, try to produce something similar, and I'm a writer, and I can tell you that to produce publishable text is no easy task. I cannot write an excellent sentence on my first try. I have to revise multiple times. One of the papers, my last paper I wrote at the Institute, I estimate went through harmonization of reason and revelation, which is academia and also on ResearchGate. I think that paper went through, I estimate, about 700 revisions, brother. 700 times I went through it. I have 150 drafts, and in one day I go through it about 5 or 6 times. That's how difficult it is to produce text that, is presentable, I would say, in the public domain. So if anybody doesn't believe the Quran is the word of God, try to produce a single surah or 10 surahs. You will be very difficult, if you ask me. That's my experience.
No, that makes sense. I'm going through your book, seeing if I have any more highlighted notes. There's a lot of good information. So I have not finished the book in its entirety yet because I'm trying to go through it slow so that it soaks in. Guys, we'll be
By the
wrapping
way,
up. Go on.
sorry. By the way, if you find any mistakes or problems, let me know. I will need to fix it. Just like you now mentioned about the verse of whether it's verse or ayah. So I would appreciate any feedback if you find any
Yeah, and
problematic.
because I'm very much so a layman. I'm not an expert on Islam by any means, but I do completely understand what you're saying. Because if I see something and it's confusing to me, and you wrote this book so that people could understand it, then you can kind of use my simplicity as a measuring stick. If
Not only that, but not being a layman, brother, that could be an advantage, believe me, because when you talk to the so-called expert, they have already been brainwashed, and it's very difficult to get through to them. So being a layman could be actually work to your advantage, quite frankly. You come to it with a mind free of indoctrination. Let's put it that way.
and guys, we're going to be wrapping up the video soon. If you have any questions, hit them really fast. I'll throw a couple out to Leslie. This has been a fascinating conversation. Once again, I appreciate you taking the time to come on. I know that somehow I butchered the time zones, and you were
Don't
waiting
worry
for
about
me
it.
last night.
No problem. No
Um,
worries.
all right, there's one question. Ask him if he believes in the Quran, why they removed 2 verses from chapter 9.
Okay, yeah, good question. Those 2 verses, when I first read the Quran and I came to those verses, I was shocked because I believe it's the last verse. The Prophet is referred to in terms that are reserved everywhere else, only for Allah, the God. And the 2 words are Rafuru Rahim. That means kind and merciful. Nowhere else in the Quran does the Quran refer to, to the Prophet in those terms, always in reference to Allah. So that made me suspicious way before I ever encountered Rashad Khalifa's work or the Code 19. And when I asked my friends to show me verses where, this word Rahim is used in reference to the Prophet or anyone else, they cannot do it. They show me verses which are not the same word. I've had that experience with 2 people at least. So, or they show me verses that apply to something else, not the Prophet himself, to his character, Azim. And again, no one has been able to show me any verse in the entire Quran where one or both of those words, Rafuru, Rahim, are used to the Prophet or anyone else. So that made me kind of suspicious whether these 2 verses belong in the Quran. But don't forget, the people who abrogated 120 piece verses actually rejected 60 times as many verses as these people who are saying these 2 verses don't belong. They claim that the supporters of abrogation, they claim that verse 9:5 abrogated, made, in other words, redundant, cancelled, and void, not just 2 verses, but 120 verses, brother. That is 60 times a bigger issue, if you ask me, if you want to talk about, so we need to look at this also in the context, that take a holistic point of view. So whether those, for me, the jury, let's say, is still out, but I'm inclined to have doubts about those 2 verses in Surah Tawbah, because, and I've given you my reason. There's a website called Islam I believe, Quran Islam, I believe, and they have an excellent. I'll send you that article in the back channel, the link to that article. They have an excellent article on
Yeah,
justice.
that's fantastic, because I can actually link it in the video description, which I linked the book that we are talking about, the first one anyway, in the description. I'm going to go back and link the second book that we're talking about the issue with saying that 1 verse, which is Surah 9:5, abrogated 120 verses. And this is what, from my understanding, the extremists use to push a violent agenda, and how they can get away with ignoring the others.
Of course, I have even heard this on Clubhouse, brother. People saying that the Muslims somehow can or even have to attack non-Muslims when they meet them. I mean, this goes against the rules of Clubhouse, by the way. I think it could even be illegal, to say such things in a public domain. So I am very concerned about some of these brothers who go around saying things like that. They have been very deeply misinformed about, Islam. There's a lot of re-education of the Muslim community that we have ahead of us. I mean, the institute I worked for 10 years in Malaysia, the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies, we were trying to do that, among other things too, to re-educate the Muslim community. But it's sometimes you run into this resistance from traditional circles. And there have been cases of people like Fazlur Rahman, people who were chased out of their home countries because the conservative circles could not accept, any kind of reform. So Fazlur Rahman had to escape, and he ended up in the United States at the University of Chicago. Muhammad Abdu at the Al-Azhar University had most of his reforms overturned by the traditional circles that came into power after him. So, yeah, we have a lot of work ahead of us in educating not just non-Muslims about what Islam really teaches, but including, and perhaps first of all, our own people, the Muslims themselves. So that's why I say, instead of worrying about the so-called Islamization of knowledge, what we need is more likely a rehabilitation of our knowledge, which has become deeply corrupted by various problematic practices and assumptions. I think I have another one or two articles on that. So we need the rehabilitation of knowledge should be a higher priority than the so-called Islamization of knowledge, by the way, which has already been rejected in Turkey 3 or 4 years ago. So that's not an issue anymore. But we need to work on our own understanding of knowledge and make sure that it is free of corruption as much as possible.
Gotcha. There is another question from the audience, which is actually a good one because anybody who started later in the video might not have heard your response to this. Ask if he believes Islam can be completely practiced without the hadith.
Well, my personal opinions is yes. Yes, I would say they can be practiced because you see, when you talk about the Sunnah of the Prophet, many people don't realize the Sunnah of the Prophet was to follow the Quran. He did not follow Bukhari. He never even heard of Bukhari. So whoever follows Bukhari is not following what the Prophet followed. Whoever follows the Quran is following what the Prophet followed. And so therefore, whoever follows the Quran is actually following the Sunnah of the Prophet. The Sunnah of the Prophet was to follow the Quran, not to follow any of those other man-made hadith books. We have 6 of them. And not only that, but these books have been presented to us by some of the ulama as revelation, brother, revelation, and not just any kind of revelation, a revelation that is equal, I repeat, equal to the words of God. Now, can you believe this? There's even a hadith. I'm not joking, brother. You can find it on the official Saudi website and also in Taj Abir al-Wani's book, according to which the Prophet allegedly said, I was given 2 things, the Quran and something similar or equal to it, the hadith. Equal. So now the Quran has an equal. Let me ask you, brother, if this person tells me that the Quran has an equal, does he also mean to say that God also has an equal? So it's a very dangerous road to go down, because if you say that the hadith books are revelation, does it follow who revealed the hadith books, first of all? Does it mean that these additional people who revealed the hadith books, what does that make them if they sent us, they revealed revelation to us? What does that make them? You see what I'm
would
getting
almost have to say that all the people who carried the words of the Prophet, one, had the ability to maintain that, and 2, were inspired by God to remember these specific points to then share and pass down. And then you would have to say that Abakari and Muslim, who compiled these, were inspired by the Prophet, or not the Prophet, my apologies, inspired by Allah to discern which out of, because I think there's 700,000 hadith,
Bukhari collected,
and like 200,000 of them are considered authentic.
6,000, 6 or 7,000,
6 or 7,000.
So about 1%. And nobody called him anti-hadith, by the way. And by the way, we need to remember that the hadiths are not verbatim words of the Prophet. They are paraphrases. So whoever says the Prophet said, and then they quote something, it's not entirely accurate to say the Prophet did not say that, the transmitter said that. Can we say that the Prophet said it if it is a paraphrase? This is agreed upon. You can find proof of this in the book called Principles of Islamic Jurisprudence, written by my own former boss, Mohammed Hashim Kamali. You can Google it online, and just Google, do a search through the document and look for the word verbatim. You will find the sentence which I'm referred to. The hadiths are not verbatim words of the prophet. So they are paraphrases. And these words we are supposed to consider as equals to the word of God. Please help me out if I'm missing something here.
No, that makes sense. Once again, I do appreciate you joining me. I apologize again for the confusion last night.
No.
I definitely, I'm going to, once you send me the info on that article, I want to read that. When I finish this book, I want to read your other book, and then I would love to talk to you about that, because I think that anytime we can address somebody abusing scriptures to cause violence or harm to people, I think that there needs to be a video like that, because the majority of Muslims that I meet are peaceful. They're
Of
just like
course.
the majority of Christians. They just want to go to work, love their families, do their best to follow God. And yeah, I mean, so that was downright fascinating how you explained in so simplistic terms one of the biggest reasons that leads to that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that the Saudis have already established a center for the examination of the hadith. They are aware of this. And even Prince Mohammed bin Salman said in a YouTube, you can see it in a YouTube video, he said in April that in Saudi Arabia, we're only going to apply penal law, in other words, criminal law, such as law on apostasy and adultery, only when it is backed by a Quranic verse. Now, the laws in the Sharia on apostasy and adultery are not backed by Quranic verses, which means that Saudi is not going to implement the alleged laws on apostasy and adultery as they currently stand, because in the current Sharia, both of these alleged crimes are to be punished with capital punishment. So what he is basically saying, we are not going to implement capital punishment for apostasy or adultery. That's a step in the right direction, I would say.
I'm just checking the chat to say hello to anybody joining. A lot of you are up very early, earlier than normal, so I appreciate you coming. And it's about coffee time again for me. Hoyt, appreciate you watching. Strong Tower, thanks for joining us. There, it looks like there might be two more questions. Would you be able to take them, or are we getting too close
Of
to
course,
time?
of course. By the way, the expression strong tower, there's a verse in, I think, the Bible, or is it the Old Testament? My Lord is a strong tower. I remember that verse. But anyway, go ahead. What are the questions?
I'm going to put money that's probably where he got that from. All right, let me get back. I always hate when the computer freezes. All right. Do you believe Allah has hands, though a different major? My computer froze. I think he's wanting to know about the hadith that indicate hands and eyes and that stuff.
Yeah, to me, this reference to the hands of Allah is what we call one of the mutashabihat verse, allegorical verses, and it should be taken allegorically. It does not mean the literal hands of God, but probably something like His power, His power and His influence. So I do not subscribe to the literal rendition of this particular verse, although I do say that some verses have to be taken literally in the Quran. Like, for instance, when the Quran says, La taqtulu awladukum, which means don't kill your children, I think we should take that verse literally. So many of the verses are to be taken literally, but not all. And we had this discussion about the mutashabihat and the muhkamat, but perhaps that could wait for another time, because it can be a complicated topic in itself.
And then this, I really enjoy this next question. He says he's enjoying the discussion, appreciate that. And he would like to know what do you consider to be the greatest threat to understanding God's will in this day and age?
Okay, for that I have a short answer. The greatest threat is not using our brains. And in fact, I'm having not using our reason to understand the revelation. There's this bias against using our reason, to understand revelation. Some of the Sufis have reinforced that. But the Quran says, keep saying, Afala takilun, will you not reason? Will you not use your, and even logic, there's a bias against the use of logic among some of the traditional Muslims. So we need to, as Umar Chapra wrote in one of his books and articles, we need to rediscover the sort of retrieve a certain rational approach to the Quran. We should not simply assume that we cannot understand with our own brain power what Allah is trying to get to us. I mean, why would Allah include verses that nobody can understand in the Quran in the first place, and say at the same time, this is Haza Kitabu Mubin, this is a clear book, and why would he say 4 times in Surah Al-Qamar that we have made this Quran easy to understand and remember? And brother, I can assure you, as someone who came to Islam from a philosophy background, I can tell you that when I came across the Quran, I found it very easy to read. If you don't believe me, try reading something like Martin Heidegger's Being and Time, or Hegel's Phenomenology of the Spirit. Now, those are complicated books, if you ask me. But in fairness to Hegel and Heidegger, I have to say that their early writings, interestingly, are very easy to understand. So I don't know what happened, but that's another topic altogether. So yeah, I would say that this culture of jahiliya, of this bias against rationality, is the biggest threat, I think, to our understanding of revelation.
Yeah, that's a great point, because when I read the Quran, I had people were like, they said, no, you need to reach out to somebody so he can explain it to you. But I thought a lot of the concepts initially were very straightforward. If you read the Quran and you didn't understand that it's saying over and over again that there's only one God, not to join partners, and to submit to that fact, I would say that's probably 75% of the Quran right there. I just summed up.
Exactly. And not only that, whenever somebody tells you that you need someone's guidance or explanation, they are implying that a human being can explain better than God. Now think about it. Do these people think that they can explain better than God himself? Don't you think it's a little bit arrogant to actually imply that? As if God required help. Allah is above all needs. He doesn't need any help from us. We need help from him. Some of these people don't seem to understand this basic point. So I don't know what else to say. I mean, the language of the Quran is actually, if you understand, how many was it? 62 Arabic words, you can understand 50% of the Quran. And if you know 300 Arabic words, you can understand 70% of the Quran. So even the Arabic is not that difficult, I would add.
Yep. And then before I kick the outro, do you have anything you would like to plug, upcoming work you're doing, anything you'd just like the chat or audience to know?
Well, just I would like to invite the audience to join us on Clubhouse. I'm running 2 rooms, basically, Progressive Muslims together with Edip Yüksel, and one called Muslim Reverse. But there's quite a number of Quranists there. And I'm sensing a kind of the Clubhouse is becoming a bit of a war zone. And I think we should get away from that. We should not call each other names. I have been called names and even threatened. So I try to stay away from such people now. And there is a way to do that. I mean, you can block any unpleasant characters, which means that whenever you block somebody, that person will never be able to enter or even see the room in which you are a speaker. So that's one way to protect yourself against such persons.
No, that's fantastic, the info. So that if you don't mind, send me a link to the 2 rooms. I'll
Sure.
put them in the video description so people can join, carry on these conversations. Also, the link to the paper will be in the description once Leslie sends me that as well.
Yeah.
Appreciate everybody who joined me this early in the morning. Let me kick the outro, and then I'll talk to Leslie for a few minutes after. Thanks again, guys, for watching.
I go hard in the paint, yeah, homie, I'm a saint. Ride or die.